Have you ever looked at the man you promised forever to? The one whose hand you held as you exchanged vows? And realized he wasn't just hiding a secret, but an entire catastrophic lie that stole your future? What do you call a betrayal that isn't about money or another person, but about your very essence, your right to create life? Is it still love when one person thinks they own the other's body? These are the questions that tore my world apart, piece by agonizing piece. And trust me, the answers were darker than any legal drama you've ever watched. I'm Sarah, and this is the story of how my in-laws spent 5 grand to surgically erase my motherhood, and how I spent 5 months taking everything back. Before we delve into the gilded cage of my former marriage, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Behind Closed Doors and ring the bell. You're going to want to be front row for the rest of this reckoning. For 5 years, Mark and I had what looked like the perfect marriage. His family was the picture of old money, East Coast legal royalty, the kind of people who treat a pro bono case like a personal crusade and a teaching job like a quaint hobby. I was the quaint hobby, a vibrant 30-year-old art teacher who saw the world in color, not statutes. They, the esteemed Wellingtons, saw me as a distraction, a pretty little splash of color on their otherwise serious gray canvas. But Mark and I had a quiet truce, a shared dream that existed outside their oppressive orbit, a baby. We'd been planning for it, not with spreadsheets and legal jargon like his parents planned everything else, but with soft, late-night whispers. A little girl with your laugh, he'd murmur into my hair. A boy who sees the world with your gentle eyes, I'd whisper back. Mark always said he wanted kids. That was the lie I swallowed whole for half a decade. He'd just always find an excuse to postpone. Wait until the next partner review, or let's get the summer house paid off first. I'd tell myself, he's just responsible. He's just under pressure. I was so busy polishing the golden cage they built around us, I never noticed the lock was on my side. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. Mark was at the firm, and I was cleaning out his rarely used home office, a mahogany mausoleum that his father had insisted on installing. I was looking for a misplaced tax document when I found it, tucked inside a stack of dry cleaning receipts. A medical bill marked paid in full. The logo was from a specialty surgical center downtown. The procedure? A bilateral vasectomy. The date? 6 months ago. My breath stopped. The air went thin. I felt the floor tilt. I wasn't seeing a piece of paper. I was seeing a blank adoption certificate, an empty nursery, a cradle dusted with ashes of a life I'd never live. My first thought was, it's a mistake. It's for a client. It's for his father. Then my eyes dropped to the fine print. Patient. Mark A. Wellington. Paid by a separate non-Mark credit card number I recognized instantly. The platinum card belonging to his mother, the formidable iron-willed matriarch, Eleanor Wellington. $5,000. That was the price of my stolen future. My career choice, my gentle nature, my inability to quote case law, all of it deemed unsuitable for the Wellington lineage. They had decided I was unworthy to bear their grandchild. And Mark, my husband, the keeper of my most intimate dreams, had let them. Worse, he had conspired with them. I stood there gripping the receipt, the shock radiating from my chest like a silent, catastrophic bell. He did this to me? They paid for it. The silence in that opulent room, a silence built on generations of Wellington deceit, suddenly felt deafening. It was the power of silence weaponized, the kind that tells you your life is a joke they can afford to end with a swipe of a credit card. All that talk of responsible timing, career goals, and getting settled, it was all a performance, a 6-month delay tactic while they quietly, clinically, removed my only leverage, the ability to bring life into this family. The art teacher in me saw the composition of the scene. Me, small and shaking, clutching the receipt that wasn't just a bill, but a surgical incision into my trust, standing in the shadow of their vast, unfeeling wealth. The innocent, trusting pawn was dead. A cold, hard calculation started to tick in my brain. They wanted to take away the one thing I valued? Fine. I would take away every single thing they valued. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to collect evidence. I was going to become everything they ever sneered at, but with their money. The thought was chilling. The thought was liberating. The thought was the first step in a revenge that would dismantle their dynasty, starting with their precious, cowardly son. My in-laws paid for my husband's vasectomy without telling me. I filed for divorce and got everything. Chapter 2. The Favoritism and Contempt Setup. The initial blinding shock of the discovery didn't last long. It solidified into a clear crystalline hatred, the kind that sharpens your focus instead of clouding it. The receipt, crumpled in my fist, wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the Rosetta Stone that finally translated 5 years of subtle, cutting contempt from the Wellingtons. Now, the countless snide remarks and the thinly veiled condescension made perfect, horrifying sense. Mark's family was a fortress built on pedigree and condescension. They were the kind of people who believed their last name was a qualification in itself. My degree in art education? Charming, Sarah. So useful for decorating the nursery? Eleanor, my mother-in-law, had once purred during a holiday dinner, her eyes sweeping over my modest dress like I was something tacky she needed to mentally remove from the room. My husband, Mark, was their golden boy, their heir apparent, the next great legal mind. Every professional victory he had, they claimed credit for. We invested heavily in his potential. His father, Robert, would boom, overlooking me entirely as if I were merely the catering staff. My existence was, at best, an acceptable side dish to Mark's main course, an asterisk on the glorious Wellington legacy. I was the creative, the dreamer, the one who didn't understand the high stakes of their life. Every time I tried to talk about my students, my passion, or the joy I found in teaching, the conversation would be deftly steered back to Mark's latest case, or the ancestral home in the Hamptons. I was the financial burden they had to tolerate because Mark loved me. A love I now saw was bought and paid for with his comfort, their money, and my silence. The pressure to produce an heir, meanwhile, had been relentless, but always layered with conditions. "Of course we want grandchildren, Sarah," Eleanor had said repeatedly, leaning in conspiratorially. "But Mark needs to make senior partner first. And perhaps you should consider, well, a more substantive career. Something that reflects the values of this family. We can't have the children growing up around watercolors." I remember smiling, trying to laugh it off, thinking they were just overly ambitious. Now I realize the cruelty. They were dangling the carrot of a grandchild they'd already secretly ensured I could never give them. They weren't waiting for me to be good enough. They were waiting for me to shut up and accept my fate as a barren accessory. The emotional wound wasn't just Mark's betrayal. It was the realization that I had lived with a coward. Mark's constant deflection about kids, his nervous laughter, his sudden exhaustion when the topic came up, wasn't due to work pressure. It was the guilt of a monumental secret. He had chosen his parents' approval and his guaranteed inheritance over the sacred trust of his marriage and my fundamental right to choose. He had exchanged my reproductive autonomy for a comfortable life. The night I found the receipt, I didn't say a word. The technical term for what I felt wasn't anger. It was a perfect cold equilibrium. The adrenaline rush was gone, replaced by the steely calm of someone who has just had a profound moral awakening. I was no longer Sarah the art teacher, the sweet wife who baked cookies and endured the Wellingtons' insults. I was a casualty of their war, and the first rule of war is to gather intelligence. I meticulously photographed the receipt, then printed copies. I started going through Mark's emails, his phone records, every file in that mahogany prison. The trail was short and brutal. Emails between him and his father, coded but clear, discussing the investment and securing the future. A text message from Eleanor to Mark a week after the procedure. "You did the right thing, son." Now we can finally focus on your career. Mother. Mother. A title I was now banned from holding because of her cold-blooded manipulation. I packed a small overnight bag, took my favorite painting, a fierce, abstract piece of red and black that always unsettled Eleanor, and left a note on the pristine marble counter. We need to talk. A lie. I didn't need to talk. I needed to act. I didn't drive to a friend's house or a hotel. I drove straight to the office of Samantha Cole, the lawyer whose specialty was demolishing high-profile family dynasties, the one my in-laws privately called the Scorpion. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of manipulation. Fine. I was bringing the predator. My new future wasn't going to be about painting pretty pictures. It was going to be about painting a very bleak picture for the Wellingtons. My in-laws paid for my husband's vasectomy without telling me. I filed for divorce and got everything. Chapter 3. The Climax in Divorce Strategy. The meeting with Samantha Cole was less an emotional breakdown and more a tactical briefing. I walked into her sleek, glass-walled office, laid the surgical receipt, the coded emails, and the damning text on her enormous teak desk, and simply stated, they wanted to save their legacy by taking away my future. I want to use that fact to take away their money. Samantha didn't blink. She didn't offer a tissue. She just leaned back, a predator assessing the kill. Sarah, she said, her voice a low, precise instrument. You're not just filing for divorce. You're suing for battery and emotional distress based on reproductive coercion. This isn't about dividing assets. It's about the deliberate violation of your bodily autonomy. This is a game changer. The confrontation with Mark happened 2 days later, not in our gilded living room, but in a small, sterile conference room at Samantha's firm. Mark arrived, bewildered and angry, flanked by the senior counsel from his own firm, his father's loyal hound. He still thought I was the docile art teacher he could easily manage. Sarah, what is this melodramatic nonsense? Mark demanded, his voice tight with the arrogance of the privileged. This is ridiculous. We can talk about this at home. I slid the receipt across the table. It stopped inches from his polished Italian loafers. Is that what you call a vasectomy, Mark? Melodramatic nonsense? His face went from indignant red to a sickly, ashy white. The hound lawyer immediately leaned in, shielding Mark like a bodyguard. But it was too late. The dam had burst. It was a difficult decision, Mark stammered, avoiding my eyes. It was pressure. Dad said the firm needed a clear path. They're investing so much in me. We can always adopt Sarah. It's not the end of the world. Not the end of your world, Mark, I shot back, my voice dangerously calm. I looked him dead in the eye, not seeing my husband, but a pathetic accomplice. You made a permanent, irreversible, life-altering decision about my body, without my consent. And you took money from your mother to do it. You stole my choice. That is not pressure. That is betrayal. That is cowardice. He tried to deflect, the practiced lawyer in him kicking in. I did it for us. For our financial security. You don't understand the pressure, Sarah, the legacy I have to uphold. It was either this or disappointing them forever. Oh, I understand the pressure, Mark, I said, picking up the text between him and Eleanor. I understand that $5,000 bought your loyalty, and that loyalty was worth more to you than my right to be a mother. You traded my womb for your inheritance, and your mother messaged you, congratulating you for doing the right thing. They saved you from me, Mark. They saved you from the art teacher, the splash of color who might have diluted their precious lineage. The hound lawyer finally intervened, sputtering about protecting client confidentiality. Samantha just smirked. He admitted the truth, counselor. It's recorded. It was a calculated action of reproductive coercion. And my client is not settling for a simple division of marital assets. We're pursuing punitive damages against Mark and exploring liability against Robert and Eleanor Wellington for intentional infliction of emotional distress and conspiracy. Mark's father, Robert, tried to call me later that evening. I sent him straight to voicemail. Then he called Samantha. His booming voice, usually so intimidating, was laced with disbelief. "This is preposterous. We were helping him. Sarah should be grateful Mark listened to reason." Samantha relayed his exact words to me, and they were the final twist of the knife. Grateful. They truly believed their wealth entitled them to dictate my fate. That moment solidified my resolve. I didn't want a fair divorce. I wanted retribution. I wanted a legal victory so public and so devastating that the Wellington name would forever be associated with their cruelty. The time for being the passive pawn was over. I was now actively moving pieces, not just on a divorce docket, but on the chessboard of their carefully constructed reputation. I had the facts, the motive, and the best lawyer money could buy, and soon it would be their money. The battle for the settlement was about to begin, and I was going to use every piece of evidence of their contempt to my massive financial advantage. I was done reacting. I was starting my reign. My in-laws paid for my husband's vasectomy without telling me. I filed for divorce and got everything. Chapter 4. The professional transformation. Pawn, queen. Divorce is usually messy, tearful, and driven by raw emotion. Mine was cold, surgical, and professional. Once the shock wore off, I realized the Wellingtons' contempt for my career was my greatest weapon. They saw me as the charming art teacher. Easily dismissed. They never saw the steel underneath, the discipline required to stand for 6 hours a day, teaching 6-year-olds the difference between primary and secondary colors, the tenacity of someone who believed in self-creation. I was about to create a whole new self. While Samantha battled Mark's expensive, blustering legal team over the initial asset split, I didn't sit home and mourn. I enrolled, not in a pottery class, but in a rigorous, accelerated online law program specializing in reproductive rights and family law. I used the pain, the righteous anger, as fuel. Every late night studying torts and precedents felt like a direct confrontation with Eleanor's condescending smirk. "You wanted me to be substantive, Eleanor? Fine. I'll become substantive enough to dismantle your family." The irony was delicious. I was learning the exact language, the precise statutes they used to justify their power. Mark was a corporate lawyer. He dealt with mergers and acquisitions. I was training to be a lawyer who understood the intimate, terrifying power dynamics of family law, the very dynamics that had destroyed my marriage. My classroom was now the library, and the curriculum was the truth about abuse of power. I started a blog, initially just a place for me to vent, but I kept it strictly anonymous. Behind closed doors, tales of reproductive coercion. I wrote about the pain, the feeling of violation, the shocking arrogance of a family who thought they could medically dictate another person's life choices. I didn't name Mark or the Wellingtons, but I didn't have to. The detail of the story, the lawyer family, the art teacher wife, the $5,000 vasectomy payment was specific enough to resonate and generic enough to protect me legally. The response was overwhelming. My blog quickly became a nexus for women who had experienced similar, quiet forms of familial control, psychological abuse, and medical manipulation. I wasn't just Sarah the victim. I was becoming a voice, a resource. The comment section was a constant affirmation. My trauma was not unique, and it was deeply wrong. This platform, born of my suffering, became my strength, my queen foundation. It gave me a purpose far beyond painting sunsets. The settlement negotiation was the first true payoff. Mark sighed, desperate to avoid a public trial where I would detail the vasectomy conspiracy and the sheer contempt the Wellingtons harbored, started making concessions. Samantha, armed with my evidence of calculated deceit and my new, unflinching resolve, didn't relent. She didn't ask for fair, she demanded punitive. I insisted on taking a substantial portion of the marital assets that the Wellingtons had originally financed. The large investment account they had set up for Mark, the cash equity in the summer house that was technically jointly titled. They thought they were investing in Mark's future. I told Samantha. They were investing in our marriage. When Mark destroyed the marriage, their investment became mine. The final settlement was staggering. I walked away with far more than the standard 50-50 split. The coercion was key. The judge, clearly appalled by the Wellingtons' actions, allowed for a much larger settlement based on the extreme emotional distress and the violation of my reproductive rights. I got a significant chunk of the community property, a generous maintenance package, and, most ironically, enough seed money to fund my new unexpected legal career. The $5,000 they spent to take my future bought me freedom and the capital to build an empire. I wasn't just taking everything. I was taking their resources and repurposing them to fight people exactly like them. The art teacher was officially enrolling in the School of Hard Knocks, and I was paying tuition with Wellington money. My in-laws paid for my husband's vasectomy without telling me. I filed for divorce and got everything. Chapter 5. The climax, the legal and public victory. 2 years passed. Years that felt like decades of intense, focused growth. I studied while working, poring over case law late into the night. I passed the bar exam on the first attempt, a fact that, I'm sure, sent a seismic shockwave through the Wellington family network. Sarah, the art teacher, was now Attorney Sarah, specializing in protecting reproductive autonomy and fighting subtle familial abuse. My blog, no longer strictly anonymous, had evolved into a respected legal and emotional resource. And my little firm, operating out of a bright modern office miles away from the mahogany shadows of Mark's world, was thriving. My new career was the ultimate refined act of vengeance. I was doing exactly what the Wellingtons believed only they were good enough to do. I was using the law, their sacred, exclusive tool, to help people their kind had marginalized and manipulated. I was the living, breathing contradiction to everything Eleanor had ever whispered about my lack of substance. The final, absolute confrontation wasn't necessary for the divorce, which was finalized, but it was necessary for my closure. It came about because Mark and his parents, in a final desperate burst of entitlement, tried to negotiate the return of some of the liquid assets I had secured. They genuinely believed that since I was no longer married to Mark, I didn't need that much money, and that I should, out of decency, return their family's capital. They requested a meeting at a neutral venue. I chose a high-end restaurant near the financial district, a place where lawyers gathered for power lunches. They were late. I was already seated at the head of the table, composed, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my entire wardrobe during my marriage to Mark. I didn't have a lawyer with me. I didn't need one. I was the lawyer. Mark walked in first, followed by Robert and Eleanor. Mark looked thinner, perpetually stressed. The glow of the golden boy had dulled. Robert still wore his custom arrogance like a shield, and Eleanor, seeing me, visibly stiffened. "Sarah," Robert began, not with a greeting but with an accusation. "We expected you to bring counsel. We are here to discuss a reasonable adjustment to the settlement." I smiled, a cool, professional smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Gentlemen, Eleanor, I am counsel, for myself, and I assure you, the only adjustment to the settlement will be if I decide to pursue further action against the two of you for conspiracy to commit battery and emotional distress, which, by the way, has a very long statute of limitations in this state." Eleanor leaned forward, her face a mask of furious indignation. "You have ruined my son's reputation and stripped him of his security. You took assets that were intended to fund the firm's future." Mark surprisingly chimed in with a whimper. "Dad's clients are asking questions, Sarah. You're making my life impossible." I set down my water glass, the sound sharp and final. "You want to talk about ruin and impossible lives? You paid $5,000 to surgically remove my capacity to fulfill the most basic human need I desired. Without telling me, that was a calculated move to ruin my future. Now, You're experiencing the consequence of treating a person like property. I looked directly at Eleanor, the one who signed the check. You wanted to stop me from creating life, so I created a life for myself, a legal career, a platform, a mission. You wanted me to remain a background decoration, but the $5,000 you paid bought me a law degree, a thriving practice, and the authority to stand here today and tell you, I will not return a single dime. The final blow was delivered not with an emotional outburst, but with cold legal fact. You wanted to save Mark from the mistake of having children with me. You succeeded, but in doing so, you handed me the legal leverage to take your money, which I then used to become everything you ever wanted me to be, a successful, powerful lawyer. You will never see me at your Sunday dinner table again. You will only see me across a courtroom, representing the very people you sought to silence. I stood up, adjusting my jacket, the ultimate power move, leaving them in stunned, defeated silence. "Enjoy your lunch," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. I left the restaurant, the air outside feeling instantly cleaner, lighter. Their control was definitively over. They thought they were eliminating a threat. They were funding the creation of their greatest opponent. I had not only gotten everything material, but I had gained the one thing the Wellingtons truly valued and could never give me: authentic power and self-respect. My in-laws paid for my husband's vasectomy without telling me. I filed for divorce and got everything. Chapter 6. The Aftermath and Moral Lesson, CTA included. The ultimate victory wasn't the settlement check, the shiny new office, or the look of cold shock on Eleanor's face as I walked away. It was the quiet, profound peace I found afterward, the kind of peace that comes when you've taken your trauma and weaponized it for good. The story of the Wellington divorce, though officially sealed, became legendary in legal circles. My firm gained immediate, fierce notoriety. People didn't just come to me for legal help. They came to me because I was a survivor who had fought the establishment and won. I began handling cases that mirrored my own, cases of financial manipulation disguised as love, and of bodily autonomy being chipped away by overbearing family interests. I was doing exactly what I was meant to do, standing in the exact power structure they had tried to exclude me from. Mark? His career faltered. His father's firm, already under scrutiny, didn't weather the whispers well. The very legacy they had tried so hard to protect began to crack under the weight of their own cruelty. Mark's failure wasn't my doing. It was the consequence of his cowardice. He chose comfort and inheritance over integrity and love, and in the end, he lost both. They thought they were building him up, but they built him on a foundation of sand and lies, and the slightest wave of truth washed him away. As for me, the desire for motherhood, once a gaping wound, slowly healed into a quiet, hopeful resolution. The need to create life was still there, but now it was on my terms, unmarred by the Wellington shadow. Last year, I opened my heart and my home to a beautiful, bright-eyed little girl named Clara. She came to me through adoption, a messy, complicated, utterly joyful process. She has her mother's gentle eyes, and I'm thrilled to report, a wild, unrestrained love for glitter and messy watercolor paints. Clara is the ultimate affirmation of my sovereignty. I am a mother, a successful professional, and a voice for those who felt powerless. The Wellingtons' $5,000 vasectomy payment was the most expensive investment they ever made, and it yielded a return they could never have anticipated. It bought me the freedom to choose my path, my career, and my family. They thought they could control my future by controlling my body. They were wrong. That money didn't just buy a surgical procedure. It bought me an education, a legal platform, and a purpose. It taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is the fierce protection of your own self-worth. The lesson I learned is this: when someone tries to reduce you to a pawn, You must use their own moves against them, flip the board, and claim your crown. My battle may be over, but the fight for bodily autonomy and emotional integrity is a daily reality for so many. If you've listened to my story and you recognize the quiet manipulations, the subtle coercions, the way power can disguise itself as love or concern, I want to hear from you. Don't just keep this story to yourself. Hit that like button if my transformation from pawn to queen resonated with you. Subscribe to Behind Closed Doors if you haven't already, so you don't miss the powerful stories of redemption and resilience we share every week. And please, drop a comment below. Tell me, what was the biggest lesson you took away from my battle? Sharing your experience is the first step toward claiming your own power. Thank you for listening to my story. My future, and Clara's, is entirely our own.